A so-called moderate Republican senator who served 36 years in the US Senate may be about to become the latest victim of the Tea Party movement and super PAC spending. We ask, is the ultra-conservative Tea Party taking over the Republican Party? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. With Mitt Romney the de facto winner of the Republican presidential nomination, many have argued that the influence of the Tea Party is on the wane. But at a local level, the movement is having a real impact, with so-called moderate Republicans coming under huge pressure from the right. Indiana Republican Senator Richard Lugar is fighting for his political life, and his opponents have spent an estimated $3 million on the campaign against him. What's his biggest crime? His foes have highlighted his willingness to reach across the aisle and compromise with Democrats. If his challenger, State Treasurer Richard Murdoch, does defeat him for the Indiana Republican nomination, some suggest it'll be a significant scalp for the Tea Party movement, which first emerged in 2009. It had a significant impact on the 2010 midterm elections, which saw the Republicans reclaim the House of Representatives. But will the movement be as influential this November? A little earlier, I spoke to Grover Norquist, the founder of Americans for Tax Reform. He's best known for the Taxpayer Protection Pledge that's been signed by 95% of Republican congressmen. I asked him if we are witnessing the resurgence of the Tea Party.
Well, when the Tea Party came into being in reaction to the massive level of spending that President Obama, Reid, and Pelosi put in 2009. So in the 2010 election, you saw that Tea Party reaction, not just in the demonstrations early in the year, but then in elections. And so about 80 Tea Party guys got elected to the House and the Senate. So they didn't go away. They came to Washington. They started governing. They stopped the president from raising taxes. In Indiana, a senator who is a little tone deaf, Senator Lugar, apparently is lagging in the polls and is expected to lose today to a guy named Murdoch, who's not out of nowhere. He's the elected state treasurer. He's been elected statewide. But he certainly has going for him the sense that Lugar, old, tired, not listening, not focused on keeping spending down. So it's
Or indeed even living in the state. Or even living in the state. I mean, isn't that part of it, though? It's more of a startlingly poorly run campaign on the part of Richard Lugar, as well as that sense of anti-incumbency and his age and so forth, rather than the sort of policy platforms that you're advocating.
Well, the reason he's in trouble is that people are unhappy about his overall programs. And again, one of the key issues that he got himself in trouble in is he's been an advocate of gun control for many years, and that is less and less interesting to the Republican voters this time around. Foreign policy, which has been his expertise, is not really coming up as a topic. And so, I'm a repository of a lot of depth and understanding about foreign issues. Indiana is not responding to that. They are responding to his votes for tax increases, his votes for too much spending, his votes for gun control.
But there is that conventional wisdom, though, that since 2010, the Tea Party's influence has declined. In fact, they're being seen in Congress as more as a sort of a force for blocking any solution to America's problems. They've also, I mean, the mere fact that you're actually so closely identified with the Tea Party has made many realize that, frankly, it is an AstroTurf thing. It is just basically the same old Washington Beltway insiders, and not some marvelous grassroots effort and so forth. The Tea Party's lost its luster.
Well, that was the Obama's position the day that 1 million people went into the streets across the country. He was asked about it and well, I didn't see anything on TV. I didn't know what was going on. Obama and the Democrats have been poo-pooing the Tea Party. They lost control of the House of Representatives because of that. They lost 6, 7 seats in the Senate because of that in 2010. And as a result, they couldn't get the tax increases and spending increases they wanted in 2011. Now, I know the Democrats' position is we're not able to solve the country's problems with all these Republicans in Congress. You're not able to raise taxes because of that. You're not able to spend more money. The rest of the country doesn't view spending more money and raising taxes as part of the solution. They see it as part of Obama's problem. That's why we have a lousy recovery and a lousy economy, because they tax too much and spend too much.
But there is that sense, though, that if there is some local resurgence of the Tea Party in different individual nomination processes and so forth, it'll be Pyrrhic, because in the end, in a general election, Richard Murdoch, for example, isn't going to win anyway.
Richard Murdoch is the elected statewide state treasurer. He is more likely than not to win in the general election. He's running against the left of center Democrat congressman. So the idea that when Tea Party people or more Reagan Republican conservatives win the primary, they can't win in the general. That happened in a couple of races in 2010. Very disappointing. We picked the wrong candidate in Colorado for Republicans and in Nevada. Beyond that, however, 80-some freshman Republican congressmen got elected, and they took control of the House, and they gained in the Senate. Republicans are going to take control of the Senate this time around, running largely Reagan Republican Senate candidates. Indiana is a solid Republican state. It has a Republican governor, a Republican House, a Republican Senate. Most of its congressmen are Republican. Its senators are Republican. The Democrats can hope to win statewide, but Murdoch, who's running today and may be the Republican nominee by the end of today, he's won statewide before this. He's not some neophyte candidate.
So what does this race in Indiana tell us about the state of the Republican Party in the U.S. as a whole? And does it suggest there's no longer a place for so-called moderate Republicans in Congress? Joining us to discuss that, Andrew Langer, who's a Tea Party activist and president of the Institute for Liberty, a conservative non-profit advocacy organization. And Kornblut is deputy political editor for The Washington Post, and as a journalist has covered the Tea Party movement extensively. J.D. Gordon is a former spokesperson for the Herman Cain presidential campaign. And Kornblut, then, is this about the Tea Party, or is this about Richard Lugar not running a great campaign, being a bit old, not having to even admit that he doesn't even have a house in Indiana, which didn't help? I mean, is this, what are we looking at here?
I think all of the above. I think what we've seen is that the Tea Party movement in the past had perhaps had its death proclaimed a little prematurely. After 2010, some said that was going to be the end of the Tea Party, and here it is again. At the same time, we can't say that Richard Lugar would have sailed to re-election even without the Tea Party. As you mentioned, his residency issue, that's a very big deal. Voters want to know that you at least have some kind of residence in the state, and he didn't. He is older. His expertise is in an area, as Governor Norquist said, that's not really hot right now. So I think the combination has made this a really difficult re-election for him.
I think we can get a sense of the campaign now, actually. We have one of their adverts that they're running against Richard Lugar, or rather one of the adverts that Murdoch is running against Richard Lugar. Perhaps we can play that now.
When Dick Lugar moved to Washington, he left behind more than his house. He left behind his conservative Hoosier values, voting for more earmarks, Obama's liberal Supreme Court choices, amnesty for illegals, even supporting $1 a gallon gas tax. Now they call him Obama's favorite Republican. Lugar's been in Washington 36 years. That's too long. Time for a change.
I don't know. I mean, looking at that, Andrew Langer, it doesn't seem to be so much of that kind of red-blooded Tea Party meat to the activists there. This is more about his age and perhaps some, core mainstream conservative
Well, no, I think all of those things are all bound up in what the Tea Party movement stands for. And keeping in mind that the Tea Party movement has its roots in popular discontent that has been going on for election cycles since 2006, where folks were very concerned about Republicans who had lost their way, were spending more, were growing government, had gotten us involved in all sorts of foreign entanglements that were unpopular. And really those underlying problems that gave rise to the dumping of Republicans in 2006, the further dumping of Republicans in 2008, and then the dumping of Democrats in 2010, none of these problems have been solved. And so Lugar, as a career Washington politician, 6 terms in office, tone deaf on the issues that are important to his constituency. Yeah, it was no great mystery that he was going to find himself in trouble by Tea Party individuals and folks otherwise deeply concerned about what's going on.
But J.D. Gordon, I mean, there was a sense that others, like John McCain, for example, perhaps now Orrin Hatch in Utah, are turning the tide by simply running a better campaign, by going on the attack as quickly as possible. That maybe this is more about Lugar's hubris, that actually if he'd gone on the attack against Murdoch, he might be doing a lot better. Again, it's more about these sorts of campaign issues rather than fundamental philosophical issues about the Tea Party and so forth.
Yeah, I'd say most of the people in Indiana agree that they want to defeat Barack Obama in November, and I think that Senator Lugar could have run a better campaign. Senator McCain has backed him, of course, but I think in showing kind of the difference in the Republican Party, Governor Sarah Palin has backed Richard Murdoch. I spent a lot of time with the Tea Party, of course, on the Herman Cain campaign. That was our base, essentially. And I also spent a month in October of 2010 in setting up events for Governor Sarah Palin. So I've worked a lot with the Tea Party in the past, and I think they've brought a lot to the party and energizing the base. But by the same token, it's had a little bit of a mixed result from time to time. Grover had mentioned it in his interview that the Republican Party lost Senate races in Colorado, Nevada, and also in Delaware. And so even though the Tea Party has brought a lot of good things to the Republican Party as far as energizing the base, there has been a little bit of a downside to it. And I would say potentially losing Richard Lugar, who's the most experienced Republican in the Senate. He's the ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's been in the Senate 36 years. He's the longest-serving Republican. I think knocking him out in the primary process is going to be harmful to the Republicans overall in Washington.
Right, because that's the point, Ann Kornblut. I mean, the message is, even the hint of compromise, we will come and we will attack you. And that's not necessarily a popular position, is it, in the wider country?
Well, hint of compromise on, I think, some very specific issues, but also generally. And I think this has been the Tea Party's mission, right, has been to hold Republicans primarily to account. You know, the point about seniority is a fair one, but I don't think that seems to be a big concern. I think anyone in a popular revolt wants somebody who's going to stay true to the values as opposed to getting seniority for
more to the point, know when the party's over and it's time to go home. I mean, you know, the idea that we're going to hold this guy in office in perpetuity because he's been in for 6 terms, no, I mean, folks are tired of that. They've seen what experienced politicians get. Folks who've been captured inside the Beltway get them.
But aren't the major backers of the Tea Party, don't they remain exactly the same Beltway figures from Dick Armey
I disagree wholeheartedly with that, because if you think about it, I mean, you know, the fact is, you know, that these are popular movements that are involved in the states. That's why actually you've seen a lot of the Tea Party movement, the sort of the national organizations that have been involved, take a back seat in the last 2 years because most of their activists are focusing on the local issues, local races.
But who's running those campaigns? Who's running? I mean, who's funding these campaigns? Who's funding your organization?
Well, I mean, we got our funding from a wide variety of different sources. But if the allegation is that we're taking Koch money, no, we don't take any money from the
Koch brothers, the billionaire.
Yeah, we take no Koch money. We get no Koch money. They haven't offered and we haven't accepted. So, you know, but the bottom line here is that the local organizations themselves, the activists, nobody can pay these people to do what they're doing. Unlike the big labor unions on the other side who literally pay people to show up and do things, you can't pay Tea Party activists to come out and do things. I mean, theoretically, I suppose you could, but there's not enough money out there to go out and do that. These folks do this on their own time.
Is that your sense, Ann Kornblut?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, you interviewed Grover Norquist. He's an establishment figure in Washington. He's got ties to the entire Republican Party. But I think that actually speaks to a bigger point, which is that the Tea Party and the Republican Party are still one. I mean, if you talk to actual Tea Party folks, almost all of them are Republicans, maybe very dissatisfied Republicans or right-leaning independents. But this is not some third party. This is a subset of the Republican Party, and it's a far-right part of the Republican Party.
And it's losing influence, especially with Mitt Romney's, arguably, actually perhaps J.D., with Mitt Romney's de facto nomination. I mean, that was seen then as the sign that, you know, your candidate, Herman Cain, couldn't do it. Sarah Palin has disappeared really from politics as more of a TV figure now, perhaps. I mean, sort of active politics as a politician. I mean, you failed. The Tea Party failed in that sense. It was just simply the usual internecine warfare in the Republicans between the far right and the centre right, perhaps. I mean, it wasn't really that different, was it? And in the end, the establishment won.
Right, and I think the Tea Party is going to get fully behind Governor Romney because, you know, a good example was Speaker Gingrich was asked the other day if Governor Romney is a true conservative, and this is after Gingrich had bowed out of the race. He said, what, compared to Barack Obama? So, of course, the Tea Party is going to get behind Governor Romney now. It was a tough nomination process, but, you know, the Republicans wrapped it up sooner than the Democrats did in 2008. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton went all the way to June. So I think the Tea Party's coming around, and they're going to fully back Governor Romney, and they're going to make a concerted effort to get out the vote and be victorious at the polls come November.
But I think that was always the beauty of the Tea Party movement and sort of getting beyond the sort of leftist myth of this monolithic entity that's being controlled by Washington, being controlled by the Washington establishment. The Tea Party movement, if you talk to 5 different Tea Party activists, you would get 7 different potential candidates that they liked for president. They weren't all going to get behind people because the Tea Party in the end was always always a reflection of the beliefs and views of the individual activists themselves. Never a view of Andrew Langer or Grover Norquist or Matt Kibbe at FreedomWorks or Tim Phillips at AFP. You know, it gets back to actually what Newt Gingrich said back in 1994, that all politics is personal. People get motivated by what interests them. And so it was no great mystery.
Right, well, we'll develop on that because we've got some new poll numbers
Yeah.
about what people who are confronted with the Tea Party now think of them. But actually, it might not be a bad moment just to remind ourselves about the emergence of the Tea Party. It began, or rather was seen to have emerged in early 2009, shortly after President Obama took office. Those who identify with the movement are generally opposed to higher taxes, they want to reduce government spending, they oppose the stimulus package and bank bailouts, they want smaller government. Hundreds of thousands protested in hundreds of cities on April the 15th, 2009 to coincide with the deadline for Americans to submit their tax returns. In 2010, Tea Party candidates scored a number of political victories. Several senators and representatives with Tea Party backing were sent to Washington. There were some high-profile failures, though. Tea Party candidates in Nevada, Delaware, and Alaska won primary victories, but failed to garner enough support to win the general election. Actually, let's pick up on that point first, on Kornblut. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there is this local activism then underway, for example, with Richard Lugar's seat. But the fact is that he might lose then, he might turn off independents and perhaps more moderate Republicans. I mean, Richard Murdoch might turn them off in a general election.
Right,
so.
that's the big question. I think in Indiana it's about 35% of the electorate is Republican. So in order to win, any candidate has to reach out to independents, to moderates, even some Democrats. And of course, that's been a strike against Lugar, the fact that he is able to do that, and that's been used against him in this primary. So we'll see in the fall whether the Democrat, it'll be someone named Joe Donnelly, whether he can defeat Murdoch if he were to win. You know, that's a question, but the Tea Party, it's a risk that the Tea Party has been willing to make. And I think the statistic was that in 2010, they had a number of primary victories, but won, I think, just fewer than half of the candidates they fielded. But, you know, this is ideological purity we're talking about.
But understand also who these independents are. I mean, as we all know, and Ann knows this probably better than anybody, we are at one of the lowest levels of self-identification with political party that we've ever had. And this idea that the 40% of the electorate that's in the middle is somehow squishy or moderate is a falsehood. If you look at the book, one of the great books that I've read in the last year is The Declaration of Independence by Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch from the Reason Foundation, Reason Public Policy Institute. And they talk about this sort of this libertarian middle, the vast libertarian middle. People who want to be left alone to live their lives. Government out of their pocketbooks, government out of their bedrooms. And they are ideological. They believe in smaller government, simple government, government that's not interfering in their lives. So this idea that there's somehow that Richard Lugar was going to reach these centrists because he believed in bigger spending or higher taxes or gun control, whatever, is not the case.
But isn't the point, though, that the mask is slipping, though, on the Tea Party as a national movement, because we now know they are basically funded by, I mean, or at least they have very major funders who basically have always been part of the Washington Beltway scene, who don't want to stay out the bedrooms, actually, specifically, for example, there. You know, who would you advocate?
Such as? I mean, give me an example.
I mean, the contraception. I mean, yeah, the point is there's a sense, though, that, yeah, the libertarianism seems to have ended with Tea Party-backed candidates when it comes down to matters of the bedroom.
I disagree with that premise for a whole, not just from the fact that if you look at the so-called major funders, I mean, certainly the Koch brothers are not interested. If you're just sort of talking, once again, coming back to the Kochs and their support of Americans for Prosperity, AFP's never gotten involved in a social ideology.
But even beyond that, though, there's that sense that this isn't, again, a grassroots movement, but it's actually just being funded by the same corporate backers that Washington's always been backed by. I mean, that's been the problem.
Well, again, that's belied by what is actually happening on the ground.
Well, let's look at we have these new poll numbers from ABC and the Washington Post. About the national popularity of the Tea Party. A recent poll found 41% of Americans identified themselves as supporters of the Tea Party, with 45% opposing the Tea Party. Among Republicans, 74% say they support the Tea Party. But then when you get down to some of the other figures, they're quite startling. It said Americans, by 23 points, say the more they hear about the Tea Party movement, the less they like it, rather than liking it more. Again, it's that sense of, well, what the specifics. Sure. People want maybe have a libertarian aspiration, but when they're told,
American media has spent the last 2 years doing what they can to tear at this organization.
No, but when they're told that libertarianism means that your Medicare is going to be privatized, or or so, I mean, then they aren't quite so popular. Or, you know, if people are asked specifically, well, do you want to tax millionaires more? They tend to be in favour of that, even though theoretically, as a broad headline, they don't favour taxation. Perhaps J.D. Gordon, you can say that. I mean, once we get to the specifics, much of what the Tea Party and the right wing of the Republican Party stand for isn't quite so popular.
Oh, I think the Tea Party's popular in its element, and I think the best part about the Tea Party is that they're able to appeal to the base, because when it comes to election day, a lot of people just simply don't vote. And so the more you can do efforts to actually get people to the polls, so that's helpful. And I think the Tea Party is pretty good about energizing its base. One of the downsides, though, and I think it was captured really well in a Wall Street Journal op-ed by Peggy Noonan, was that there's a sense now that if there's some kind of compromise in Washington, that the wings of the party, whether it's the left wing of the Democratic Party or the right wing of the Republican Party, will go after the people that are in the middle. And I think in the case of Senator Lugar, what you're seeing is a combination of effects, really, which very well may lead to the Republicans' most experienced senator, the ranking member, like I said, on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, in a time that is very focused on very delicate relations with the United States and the rest of the world. We've got the Arab Spring to contend with. We've got Iran that's trying to develop nuclear weapons. We've got the rise of China. We really need Senator Lugar's expertise, in my opinion, but I think that just because he hasn't been ideologically bent, he's been willing to compromise on certain issues, particularly on fiscal issues and on gun control, things like that. He may be taken out. So I think if your viewers look at that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Peggy Noonan, that'd be a good place for a frame of reference.
But what about this difference between the headlines of the Tea Party and the specific policies that they advocate, Anne Kornblut? Again, to return to that poll, they said the Tea Party wins support from just 24% of Americans who are chiefly concerned about unfairness in the economic system that favors the wealthy, versus 69% support among those who see a bigger problem with overregulation of the free market and so forth. The challenge is that more are concerned about fairness by a 15-point margin. And again, once the specifics of the Tea Party platform are shown, i.e. low taxes for the rich, no regulation for the environment and so forth, people aren't quite as keen as this libertarian headline suggests they might
Right,
be.
and there's been this gap, I think, between, like you say, the headline, the sort of the zeitgeist, if you will, of the Tea Party movement in the beginning, which really came out of people's sense of unfairness and unrest and dissatisfaction with government overreach. Around the time of healthcare, you'll remember, this is 2009, matched up with taxes, which, also has spawned the Occupy movement. There are some things that the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement have in common, but they're kind of spiritual. They're not in the details, and I think that's where the real diversion is. And I would say also it's worth noting that you're going to hear President Obama and the Democrats talking a lot about inequality. They've looked at these numbers, and that's where they want to try to limit the Tea Party's national appeal, keep it in a box within the Republican
And the Tea Party's
Party.
responsible, but yeah, we shouldn't tax the rich, and that's not going to be very good.
I will say this, I think Ann would agree with me in that, if you get down to the specifics that come out of the Democratic Party platform, you will get similar sorts of levels of folks who say, well, I don't want to define a millionaire as someone who's making $250,000 a year or more. I don't want them sort of coming after sort of my own entitlements that are out there. I mean, it's all sorts of things where whenever you drill down into the specifics, you always lose people on the way. It's always the broad brushstrokes that bring the most people in. And I do take issue with sort of your premise that comes out there that the Tea Party movement has been against all environmental regulation, which is, so profoundly not true as to be laughable. The fact is, yes, there is a definite need out there to cut the regulatory state. The fact is, regulations now cost the American economy $2 trillion annually. That's 15% of GDP overall. We have got to do something about bringing that cost down. No one's talking about getting rid of all environmental regulation or all safety regulations, but bringing things down to the manageable level, because it does have an
manageable
impact.
That the Koch, in the Koch brothers' viewpoint, perhaps, or some of the major.
How about manageable in terms of President Obama's own Small Business Administration, which is the study that I just cited came out of? I mean, this stuff has an impact. It's not my numbers. It's not right-wing numbers. This is a government number, government organization.
J.D. Gordon, I mean, you mentioned that Peggy Noonan interview. I mean, or rather that article in the Wall Street Journal. Do you feel that the Republican Party is now rallying behind that sort of point of view now? There is some kind of fight back underway, perhaps, that against the all or nothing approach of Grover Norquist and the Tea Partiers and so forth in Congress, or are we just going to be stuck for the moment?
Well, I think it's a mix. I think here in Washington and certainly among some circles, people feel like Peggy Noonan does, that we're about to lose a senator who's very valuable to us in the long haul and who really understands foreign policy for things that really shouldn't have done him in. But by the same token, there is a very large segment of the population that really wants change, that they don't want any sort of compromise whatsoever, and also just the fact that the guests have mentioned during the program, and Grover did as well. Senator Lugar's getting older. He hasn't lived in Indiana for quite some time. He's been in D.C. 36 years. And so there's just a lot of cumulative things, cumulative reasons why the electorate in Indiana may have him go. And so we'll see what the voters say in Indiana. It should be an interesting race. Right now he's down by quite a few points. We'll see what the results are tonight, though.
J.D. Gordon, thank you very much. Anne Kornblut, thank you too. Andrew Langer, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@aljazeera.net.